Bingo. Okay, and I'll go ahead and share screen. So you guys want to have those files ready to go, although the first few things that we do are just going to be in the browser, and you won't actually need those files. But, you know, doesn't hurt to go ahead and have them ready because we'll be jumping into those fairly quickly. I'm jumping over to Chrome here, and that's the browser that I recommend using when you're first getting to know the console and getting to know JavaScript. It's got good, solid, reliable support for just about everything that we're going to want to do in the language. You know, I can't imagine that Edge or Firefox does not. Just for whatever reason, Chrome, I settled on that years ago as being the one that's the most reliable for testing, which means, of course, at some point, it's not the one you want to use for testing because you're going to have users who are using different browsers. So you want to make sure everything works in those other browsers as well. But Chrome's a good one to start with, I think. If you're using Edge or something like that, it's possible that you'll run into some differences in how the console interface is, at least, although I wouldn't expect many differences in the way the JavaScript is interpreted. So I'm popping
Aren't
over
they all
to...
considered Chromium-based browsers?
You know, I know Edge is, and I'm not sure about Firefox. If that's still, what, Gecko, whatever it was, or if it's all Chromium-based. I'm not sure. I'd have to look into it. It's been too many years since I did some research on it. But yeah, I bet you're right. Anyway, this is the page as we ended up with, where last thing we did was we built in some more media queries. So we had our mobile view, and we had kind of a mobile landscape or tablet view, and then tablet wide view here, and the desktop view up here with changing layouts at different breakpoints. And one of the things that we have to get accomplished today is our navigation. So we used CSS and HTML to build our little drop-down button here, but it doesn't do anything yet. Even though it's got the pointer cursor, when you tap on it, nothing happens. So that's one of the things we've got to fix. So before we do anything, I'm going to access the console. And the way that I do that is with Control-Shift-I on the keyboard. I should open this guy up. If you don't remember the keyboard shortcuts, you can always get into this interface with every browser that I know of by doing a right-click on anything in the web page and just going down to Inspect. I think in Firefox it says Inspect Element, but it's always something like that. And Inspect, and it'll bring this up. It's just a different tab here, so it'll show the elements here, and then the console. The sources is, well, I won't go into all this stuff here, but later on, like when you do front-end web-based programming, you'll learn about the network stuff, checking on fetch and AJAX and so on through the network. But right now, we're just going to stick to elements and console, these first two tabs here, which should be there, again, in every browser that I know of. So the elements shows the elements of your web page here, and then it also shows the CSS. And note that when you hover over one of these elements, it gives you a little, like a hover state over here, highlights it to show which element you're hovering over. If you go to the console here, this is where we can play with JavaScript. This is our JavaScript sandbox built within the browser here. And so this is the first place that we're going to jump to. So this is, I don't know, it's again, if you've only done like C, like compiled languages, this might seem just kind of weird. Like, really, we can just like make stuff happen right here without having to compile anything? And yes, you can. So let's go ahead and just type a few things in here. So I'm going to familiarize you with at least a few of the objects that are already present within the browser environment. And the top one is window. Now, if you've got something that has a value to it, you can just type it right here into the console and hit return, and it should give you the value of that if it has a value. If it doesn't have anything returned from a function, for instance, then it'll tell you undefined. And if it can't find the identifier at all, then it'll throw an error at you. But let's start with the top most object here that I've ever worked with, which is window. The window, if I just type in window and hit enter, then it'll give me a return about, hey, yeah, this is the window object. And then if I drop down this little arrow, then it'll show me the properties or methods of this object here. So for instance, there's a window.alert method. And there is a window.location, right? And a window.print, and so on and so forth here. So this is the top one here. So if I typed in window.alert like this, then that's like one of the properties of window, but it's a dynamic property. It's a method, which means it's a function that's attached to this object. So if all I do is type in window.alert, it just tells me like, yeah, this is a function. That's what that f is, and this is the alert function, and so on. If I actually want it to do something, then I have to do these two parentheses to call that function, right? So if I do window.alert and then just do this and hit enter, then, oh, hey, something happened. This is an alert dialog panel that pops up. Now, usually you tell it to say something. Right now, this is not saying anything, but it still will run the alert. It just without any content. If I do window.alert and then actually give it an argument here, something like hello world in quotes, and then hit enter, then it will actually give me a hello world, right? So that's just kind of getting started with it. So this is an object that's already present within the browser environment. This is a property of that object, and it's a function. So if I actually call the function, then something will actually happen, presuming I'm using it correctly and so on. So the window is called the global object or the global scope. Everything is contained within this window. Let's see, what's another one? Document. Okay, so let's take a look at the document here. Instead of typing window, I'm just going to type in document and see what I get. Hit document and hit return. And same thing as before, right? It showed window with this little drop-down arrow, and now I'm getting like this hash document with a drop-down arrow. But this time, go ahead and drop down the arrow here and take a look at what we've got. Ooh, this is starting to look like HTML. And sure enough, if I hover over these guys, then they give me the little highlight color over here, just like when we were in the elements, like this. When I was hovering over a thing, it shows up over here in the window. And when I do this over here, the viewport's giving me the same thing. So this is like the elements over here. And if I drop some of these down, then you can see more of the HTML that we've got built into the page, like the elements and the comment that have been built into the head. And if we do the same thing with the body, then we get those guys instead. So, okay, so what about document? Does document have properties the same way that window does? Yeah, it does. The two that I can think of off the top of my head are the two children that it has. So you guys know what those are, and if you don't, you can see it right over here. Here's the HTML element, which is our root element, and then the two children are head and body, right? So as it turns out, I can do document.head, and it will return that same head element. I've also got document.body, and there's the body element. I don't think I've actually ever used document.head for anything, but I could see situations where you might want to or need to. I've definitely used document.body many times. If you just need to access the body element within your HTML, then that's the easiest way to do it if you're not using jQuery or something like that. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, it does not extend further than that. So let me drop down body up here and see, we've got some children inside body as well. There's a header and nav and main and footer. So can I keep this going? Can I type in document.body.header, for instance? And no, it's not returning anything past that. So it does not continue to give you children elements as properties of the parent element after head and body. And really, those aren't really children elements of document either, because they're children elements of HTML, right? But it's been given to us by JavaScript that we can access these directly by treating them like properties of document and returning those elements. So how do we select for other elements on the page? Well, we already know how to do it in CSS, right? We've used tag selectors, which is sometimes called type selectors, where you just like indicate what kind of element you want to select for, like H2 or P for paragraph or block quote, right? We've been doing that in CSS for like a week and a half now. Is there a way to do something similar in the JavaScript? Yeah, there is. Now, if you go into olden times JavaScript, back when JavaScript really did suck, you didn't have the methods that I'm about to show you here. You had like document.getElementById, where you could grab something that had a particular ID. You could get element by, or get elements, sorry, plural, by tag name, and you could like select for all the paragraphs or all the H1s or whatever. And then after a certain point, they took pity on us and added document.getElements by class name, which they didn't even have that when I first took a look at JavaScript. But now it's like it's been years since I've used any of those because one, they're just very verbose, and two, they're kind of clunky. I think it's much more convenient to have a method where you can select for elements on the page using CSS selectors, the ones that we've been learning over the past week and a half. And yeah, there are two methods that you can use in order to access those. So, for instance, I'm going to do document dot, no, not get, I was just talking about gets, query selector. So document.querySelector. And what it did is it grabbed, at once upon a time, JavaScript was so clunky and jQuery was so nice and just a breeze to use. And I think they kind of took some of the things that jQuery was doing and brought them into the JavaScript. And one of those was being able to use simple CSS selectors in order to select for elements on the page. And so this is a method, just like window.alert was up here. So you put the parentheses in, and then you put a pair of quotes inside the parentheses, and then you can put a CSS selector in here. So for instance, I know I've got 3 figures on the page somewhere downstairs, so I'll just try this. Document.querySelector figure, right? And then hit enter, and look, it grabbed me a figure element and returned that, just like we were able to like return the head and body here. But now, instead of using just the dot syntax, we're using a method, document.querySelector, and then parentheses, and then quotes inside there is figure, and there's the CSS selector that returns this guy. However, you might note that there's something a little bit different about this. If I, in CSS, tell it to use a tag selector of figure and give it some formatting rules, those rules are going to be applied to all the figure elements on the page, not just one. So there is another method that will grab those, which we'll do in just a moment. First, let's see, what do I want to do here? I want to show about how this stuff makes things editable, this here. This, you might be tempted to think of this as being the same thing as your source code, the same thing as the HTML that you wrote. It's not really. This is something called the DOM, which is the document object model. It's not the actual document. It's a document, it's a model of the document in object orientation. And it's the thing that the browser uses in order to take your HTML and paint it onto the page, or render it onto the page. Now for a while, this is before my time, but for a while, that existed, but it wasn't available to us coders. It was just a tool that the browsers used in order to render a page. And after a certain point, when JavaScript came along, they started allowing coders to access that. And the big deal about the DOM, as opposed to your source code, is that you can modify the DOM. You can't modify the source code, not with front-end JavaScript. You need something on the server side, like PHP or Node in JavaScript, in order to modify an actual file. JavaScript on the front end doesn't really have the power to do that. Without jumping through a whole lot of hoops, and maybe not even then. But the DOM is something that is modifiable. It's changeable. It's mutable. And to show you, let's go ahead and take a look here. So we've got those 3 figures: Jeffrey Toobin, Andrew Ross Sorkin, and Amy Chua. This is the first one. So this is Toobin. And it's got Toobin220.jpg. There it is. There's Toobin220. Maybe I'll go ahead and try and make this a little bit bigger. There we go. But you can go ahead and tap into this over here. with a double click, and then you can make modifications to this. Remember, this is the DOM and not the document itself. So for instance, if I erase Tubin and type in Chua, which is the third person, then I've just changed that JPEG there, right? So I've modified the way the page is being painted without modifying the document itself. Let's take a quick look. I'm going to pop over to Elements here and find those guys. There's the main, it's in the second section, and the first figure, and look at that. It's Chua 220. If I hovered over it, it shows this to me. I can go to the source, but otherwise the document still says Jeffrey Tubin. Now I want to show you the difference here. This is important. I'm going to do a Control U to bring up the view source. This is the one I keep trying to do in Edge, and it keeps popping up that screen reader instead. But this is the actual, if I do view source with Control U, this is the actual document. And if I scroll down here to the figures, take a look. This first one has not been modified, right? It still says Tubin 220. But the DOM has been modified in order to update the way the page looks. So that's really what the DOM is all about. It's something that's mutable, it's changeable, and all without modifying your source code. Now let's take a look here. If I refresh the page now, I'm going to hit Control R and refresh the page. It goes back to the way it was. And the changes that I made to the DOM disappear when the page refreshes. Let's see, where am I going here? Oh yeah, there's main, drop it down, second section. Try that again. First figure, and yes, it's back to Tubin, as you can see right over there. So, and then the console also gets stripped out when you refresh the page. There's something else to keep in mind. As a sandbox thing, it's like all the stuff that we just did is gone. I can still access it though. It's kind of like, in fact, it's very much like the Bash console, where you can hit up arrow on your keyboard and get to the last things that you did. And even if I've refreshed the page, I can still get to some of the stuff that I just did by hitting the up arrow. So this is really important because sometimes you're testing stuff and you break it badly, you need to refresh the page, but you don't have to write everything all over again. So you just kind of arrow up until you get what you want. So this is the last thing that we did. I can arrow up further than that, but I'll go to document.query, select a figure, and return, and there it is again. So let's do that other method that I was talking about. If I want to select for more than one figure, then it's a different method. It looks pretty similar. It's not quite the same. It's document.query selector all. And then if I put figure in here, in quotes like before, hit return. Oh, I misspelled it. So arrow up and get rid of the, or actually add another R there. There we go. And now it's returning 3 figures. This is in a node list, which is a kind of collection. There are node lists, HTML collections, in addition to your more familiar friends of arrays and objects and so on. JavaScript has some cool collections that don't exist in all programming languages, like sets and maps and node lists and things like that. So this node list, if I drop it down, it looks like an array, right? It's got 0, 1, 2 for the numbered keys, and then it shows figure, 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 the 3 elements. If I drop one down, well, it shows all the properties in addition to the elements itself. But it's not an array. It's an array-like object, as it's called in JavaScript. It's similar to an array, but not quite. It's even got a length like an array. So let's see, what else do we want to do with the console before we pop over to our document itself and start coding in earnest? Let's see, let's create a variable. So I'm not sure whom of you have taken like the programming fundamentals or taken like the C++ class or what have you. But a variable is just an identifier for a bucket of information, bucket of data. And there are a couple of different ways of creating one in JavaScript. One is to use the older var keyword. which is kind of standard on scripting languages, but I generally these days use the newer let. For various reasons we won't go into here, but take front-end web programming, and yeah, there'll be probably some discussions on let versus var and the difference between the two. But I would use let most of the time if you're going to create a variable. Something that's kind of cool in JavaScript, or horrible depending on who you ask, is that one, it's what's called a loosely typed language, which means that when I declare a variable, I don't have to tell the environment what type of data it's going to be. A lot of scripting languages, you have to tell at the beginning, is this an int, or is this a floating point number, or is this a string, or is it an object? What is it? You don't have to do that in JavaScript. In fact, you don't even need to give the variable an initial value at all if you don't want to. If I just want to say let, like for instance, I'm going to call this my var. And by the way, before we go any further, notice the coding convention in JavaScript is to use camel case or intercaps, where if you're slamming several words together, then you just capitalize the beginning of every word except for the first one. So like query selector, capitalize the S, query selector all, capitalize the S and the A. You don't have to do the same thing if you don't want to. You can also use underscores or just smash everything together lowercase. But this is the convention in JavaScript, is to do it like this. So when I wanted to create a variable called myvar, I did it the same way. So I would recommend doing it this way as well, although again, you don't have to. So anyway, that was a little side discussion. I'm going to say let myvar and just hit enter. And it's fine. Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, it said undefined, that's bad, right? No, it's not. It just means that my variable isn't returning a value. And when it doesn't return a value of any kind, then it returns undefined. So you always have something being returned there. So if I type in my var, it still says undefined, but it's not giving me an error. Like when I typed something wrong up here, I forgot the R in query selector all, it gave me this type error up here, right? So if my var didn't exist, it would give me some kind of an error, but it's not doing that. So I declared a variable here, and I didn't tell it what type I needed to be, and I didn't even give it an initial value. Then I could say my var equals hello world, like so, and then it returns a value. Now if I just type in my var, it gives me the hello world. So notice, those of you who have done scripting before, this is a string. You can tell by the quotes, right? That's pretty much universal, I think, as strings go in quotes. I can now implicitly change the data type by saying my var equals 4. And then 4. No problem, okay? I just implicitly change the data type from a string to an integer. And JavaScript has zero problem with any of this stuff. So again, if you've done C++ or something like that, your eyelids are probably starting to twitch right now, because it's just a different little kind of animal. It kind of lets you do whatever you want to pretty much at any time. Now there is a version of JavaScript called TypeScript, which is for people who just can't handle this, or just don't like it, or don't want it. And I'm being a little bit deprecating there. There actually are good reasons to use TypeScript for enterprise level applications. But if you're not, then have fun with this, because it is kind of fun, I think. So anyway, what was I going to do? Okay, so we were going to declare an actual variable here. Let's do let figure equal document.query selector figure. So I'm using the first one that we did up here, the document.query selector figure. So it's only going to select for the first one here, the 2-bin. Let's see, another little aside. Notice that sometimes I'm putting semicolons at the end, and sometimes I'm forgetting to. JavaScript is fine with leaving the semicolons off, except in a few specialized situations where you kind of need to have it there. But other than that, you don't really need it most of the time. There's something called the automatic semicolon insertion in JavaScript, ASI. And if you look that up on Google, you will find some scathing battles about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, whether or not you should always put semicolons or not. People will be arguing about this forever. It's another one of those little quirks of JavaScript. I really should be doing semicolons the whole time since I'm showing you JavaScript. I should show you the quote-unquote official way to do it. But truthfully, I often don't put them in my own code at all. If I'm doing code for someone else, yeah, I always put them in. So anyway, that's just to explain why sometimes I'm putting them in and other times I'm forgetting to, and they still always seem to work. So I've declared a variable and I've set an initial value here now, unlike before. Document.query select a figure and return. And it's not returning anything here, but if I type in figure now, then it'll give me that figure element, which is that first one. If I hover over it, it highlights over here. So let's do something now. Not much, just a little bit. Let's change the styling of this. Let's make it so that this figure has a different background. And I can't remember the colors that are being used, but I'll just make it like gray or silver. Let's make it silver. So that should be dark enough so we can see the background on there without making it so dark we can't read the text. So the way that you change an element's CSS using JavaScript, it's a property of a property. So there's figure.style, and then you want to tell it what you want to change about the style, which I just said we want to change the background. So figure.style.background equals, and then tell it silver. Now the one difference between this value and the CSS is that in CSS you don't have to use quotes. Unless you've got a particular value that actually has spaces in the value, then you have to put quotes around it, but otherwise you don't have to. But in JavaScript, you have to. If I don't put the quotes around silver, it's going to think that silver is a variable name or some other kind of identifier, and it's going to say, I'm sorry, I don't know what that means. I'll go ahead and show you. I'll just hit enter. It gives me an error, reference error, right? So it's just as you're trying to reference something that doesn't exist. So, but now let me arrow up, and this time I will put the quotes around it. Okay, so another aside, quotes. What kind of quotes should you use? So far I've been using single quotes, and those are fine. Unless you have like a straight apostrophe somewhere in here, then that can cause problems. You can also use double quotes, like so. That's fine. JavaScript has its own kind of quotes as well, which are called template literals, or some people call them string literals. And there actually are a couple of special things about these kinds of quotes and the string that's inside of them that are not available within the other ones. So and maybe at some point, in fact, we might do that today. Yeah, we might do that today. So I'll show you a little bit about these guys. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and stick with my usual, which is to do the single quotes. It's totally up to you which one of those you want to do, until one of them gets you in trouble, and then you start to learn about the quirks of each one. Okay, figure.style.background equals silver in quotes. Enter, and we just changed the background color of this guy right here. Once again, let me pop over to the elements, and we'll just take a look at what happened. So here's the first figure. Notice that it's got the style on it here. It added a style attribute, which so far I've been steering you guys away from doing because this is not the way you want to style your documents. You want to have it in a separate CSS style sheet. But remember, I was saying that JavaScript on the front end really doesn't have the immediate capability of modifying actual files. So it doesn't have a way of reaching into the CSS style sheet, which is an external document, and changing it. It pretty much has to do it in the DOM because that's what JavaScript is built for. So this is the way it does it in the DOM, by adding the style attribute. And for this, when you're adding stuff, you're changing the appearance dynamically, I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. I would never code this way into my HTML, but having JavaScript do this on the fly, it's perfectly fine because remember, when we refresh the page, it all goes away again anyway. Now, here's another thing that I wanted to show you and I forgot about, and I'm glad it came up. I refreshed the page, and I've gone back to the console, and I up arrow and I say, oh, okay, so figure.style.background equals silver. I should be able to do that again, right? Wrong. Uncaught reference area. We ran into the reference area error before, right? It was when we did silver without quotes, and it thought that we were trying to reference like a variable name or a constant name or something that didn't exist. And what it's saying now is figure is not defined. It's something important to realize about this console environment. When you refresh the page, all of your all your references, all your identifiers go away. So it may be able to easily change this background to silver, except it no longer knows what figure is because it's forgotten that that variable name is figure. So in order to make this work, I'd have to arrow up a couple of times until I get to let figure, right? Creating and giving an initial value to this figure variable. And now I can go to this and it works again. Okay. So I'm not showing you all that stuff to confuse anybody. I just wanted to show you that when you refresh the page, if you're using this console sandbox, then it's not going to work after you refresh the page necessarily. If you've got identifiers, then you have to restate them. Now, if you find yourself restating the same variable over and over and over again and you're getting sick of it, well, that's the time to start using an actual JavaScript file and loading that file along with your HTML. And when you do that, then those variable names will just be available in here no matter how many times you refresh the page. Okay, so again, not having any idea what classes you guys have taken in the past or not. Is anybody thoroughly confused yet? Do not be ashamed to say so. That sounds like a comment.
No, that sounds like a rose my hand.
That was something else. Okay. Okay, so if you guys have all done some scripting before, then this is probably nothing too out of bounds for you, with, of course, some of the weirdities of JavaScript aside. But if you haven't done any scripting before, don't worry about it if this isn't making sense. If someone showed this to me before I had done any scripting, like if all I'd ever done is HTML and CSS, and someone showed me all this stuff, I would have been like, what are you talking about, dude? There's no way I have any idea what you're talking about. I didn't even understand variables at first. When I first started going, I didn't get it. I wish that someone had sat down and explained it to me a little bit more than what I got. I wish someone had said to me, hey, did you do algebra in high school? I'd be like, yeah. Okay, so remember X? X is a variable. That's what the name means. It's a variable piece of data, right? It can be anything. X, you can assign some number to it, or you can assign a different number to it, or you can assign a function to it, or whatever. If someone had just explained that to me, that would have saved me quite a bit of trouble in the beginning. But yeah, that was my first major hurdle, was figuring out just what the heck is a variable, for goodness sake. If X equals 4, why not just do 4? But yeah, then the whole point of it is it can be changed, and a lot of data you don't know until you get that data from your user. So it has to be variable, right? So you guys probably do not have that problem. But anyway, yeah. And then the other troubles I had with JavaScript being the first language, it's just that it's just such a weird, quirky little language. I've come across like programming logic classes online that I was perusing, and they said, okay, so you guys need to learn programming. We're going to do JavaScript. And all I can think is, man, that's probably not a good choice. I would probably choose something really simple, almost declarative, like well, Ruby or Python or something like that. JavaScript is just so quirky. I would hate to go from JavaScript to, I don't know, something that's a lot stricter and object-oriented, because then I would probably have a lot of trouble. But anyway, so I think that what we can do now is we can pop on over to our document here. So this is where we get into the 19.1 perspective at the end of chapter 19, the part that says enhance a page with JavaScript. There's a couple. There's 19.1 is enhance a page with JavaScript, and 19.2 is use jQuery for image swaps. We're not going to do jQuery yet. If we do it at all, we will do it on Tuesday of next week, or maybe tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. But in any case, we're just going to use straight JavaScript tonight. Vanilla JavaScript, as they call it. So it is time to pop over to our coding environment. If you do not have Your chapter document up yet? Please bring it up in your coding environment. And I am going to do two things. I'm going to create a new subfolder. That's a folder that shouldn't be in there. Hang on a second. I'm always telling you guys to watch your directory structure, and then I'm not doing the same thing. Let's get rid of the stuff. Get rid of stuff that you're not using anymore and you don't need. But really? Okay, so I'll do it later. Okay, so here it is. So I'm going to make a new folder, and almost always I've seen it called JS. Sometimes someone will call it scripts or JavaScripts even. That's kind of one I haven't seen for a while. But JS I think is the usual thing. So let me go ahead and make a new folder here. I'll call it JS. And then inside this folder, I'm going to make a new document here. And I'm going to call this one ch19 for chapter 19.js. Give it a .js extension. And just like with CSS, I sometimes like to give myself a comment upstairs here. Or something like that. But it's totally up to you whether you want to do that or not. Now, in order for anything that we do here to work, we have to call it into the HTML page. You can't just have a JavaScript file run by itself in the browser. If you run into a situation where it looks like that's happening, you're probably looking at a node project where you've got something like an index.js, but that's being processed on the server side and it's still spitting out HTML files. So over here, there's two places where you can put the script. You can put one in the head or you can put one in the body. Those are the only two places that are allowed. This has always bothered me. I don't think it really belongs either place. Somebody once upon a time was saying, we've got a head and a body. There should really be a foot element down here that we could put stuff like that doesn't really belong in the head or the body. But this is sadly something that has never happened. So if you put a script element outside of the figure, or outside of the head or the body, it will fail validation. It's not acceptable. So generally speaking, you want to put the scripts either at the very bottom of the head element or the bottom of the body element. So when should you use one and when should you use the other one? Generally speaking, if you're using a library like jQuery, or like underscore or Lodash or something like that, then generally speaking, you want to put it up here in the head element so that that JavaScript library loads before the rest of the page, usually, so that all of the methods and functions and variables that you need are going to be available even before the page loads. However, when you're writing your own JavaScript, you generally want to do the opposite. Put it at the bottom of the body element so that the opposite can happen. So all of the DOM loads except for these last two little bits here, and then all of those elements are available for use in your JavaScript. Because if you try to write functions that have something to do with modifying the DOM, and you put it at the top of the page, and the scripts manage to run before the page loads, then you're going to wind up running into trouble because it's not going to find the elements they haven't loaded yet. I don't know why I've got this weird comment. I'm just going to get rid of that. So this is where we're going to put something in here. We're going to put a script. And I'm going to put a source. Now, go ahead and make the element first. So there's the script. So why is there an opening and closing element or tag, unlike the link, which is just an empty element because it references a different document? There's no content to put in here. Why did they do it like this? Well, because you actually can put JavaScript directly inside of here. And sometimes you do just when you're testing stuff out. Like for instance, that situation I was talking about. If you just wanted to, like I'm tired of typing the same variable declaration over and over in the console, so I'm just going to declare some variables here and spit them out on the page so that I don't have to worry about it anymore. That would be an appropriate use for this, but that's kind of a development phase thing, right, where you're testing stuff out. Generally speaking, if you're going to be using JavaScript that you plan to actually run, in production, then you generally want it on an outboard file like this, like your CSS. And that's plus the fact that you can make it more modular that way. You can have multiple script elements calling in multiple different script external files. And yeah, that's another good reason to do it. So here's how this looks. It's going to have a source attribute just like an image. Like image source equals, script source equals. I still don't know, I haven't read it. I'm sure that there's a reason why they use src for images and scripts, but use href for links and hyperlinks. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know what the difference is or why that was chosen. There must be a reason, right? So source equals, and then what do we put this into JS, right? Slash, and then ch19.js. And now that that's in there, we can put scripts in here, and they will run when the page is refreshed in the browser. For instance, let's go ahead and do that figure that we did. And let's say we've typed it a bunch of times in console, and we're tired of typing it. We don't want to do it anymore, so let's put it on a JavaScript file here. I'm just going to do let figure equal document.query selector.
Hey, Mr. Biswell, can you go back real quick?
Oh, to the HTML?
Then, yeah, the HTML.
Yeah.
The JS is the folder name?
Yes, I created a folder name called JS.
Okay, yeah, I named mine JavaScript. Okay.
That'll work too. If you want to do that, that's fine. I've seen that. I've seen JavaScript, script, but I see JS more often than I see anything else.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
All right, cool. So here in the JS, let me go ahead and start typing that again. This is just the same thing that we put into the console. And by the way, you can copy and paste from the console here too. If I pop over here and then arrow up until I get this guy, then you can just select it and copy and paste it right into your code, right? So if I copy that and paste it over here, let figure equal document.query select a figure, and I save it. Then I go over to the browser and I refresh. Now before, once I refreshed, that figure variable was no longer available, right? But now, if I type in figure, boom, there it is. Because it's been declared here and it's been called in with the HTML5, and now the browser can remember it. Or rather, let me walk that back. It's not actually remembering it, but when you refresh it, this JavaScript page gets loaded again. And so it once again knows what the figure variable is.
You're just telling it what to remember.
Kind of, yeah. But again,
It's like gaslighting.
I think when you refresh the page, it actually does still forget, but then when it reloads the HTML page, it's loading this JavaScript file again. So it's like you're telling it again what it is. And then once the page is loaded, until the page is refreshed or you move away from the page, it'll then, over that case, yeah, it'll remember then because it's part of the runtime environment now. So let's see, what are we going to do? Let's do the 19.1. Okay, so we've got this one. The first thing, or one of the things that it has to do is do a print page button on the HTML. A little bit goofy, sure, but I could see some situations where the user might want to do that. So let's pop back over here to the console. And remember our old window global document, or sorry, global object here. And one of the functions that has attached to it is window.print. Now remember, if I just do window.print without the parentheses, it's just going to return, yeah, it's a function. There it is. Use it if you want to. Okay, how do I use it? Well, add the parentheses that are necessary for a function call, window.print, parentheses, and hit enter, and looky there. Now it wants to print. And it's giving me the print CSS and so on, which is basically just scripting out most of my CSS. So cool. That's how you print a document in JavaScript. Easy peasy, right? So let's go ahead and get that into our actual JavaScript document. And well, before we do that, let's make a button for it. So I figure it should be somewhere down towards the bottom of the page, probably like, I guess, let's see, where do I want this? I guess underneath this. Hang on, let me take a look at this out here again. Does it make sense to have it over here, though? Where do you guys think? Should I put it so that it's underneath the main section here or underneath this kind of sidebar thing? Because if we pull this back in, like so,
Underneath the tickets.
underneath ticket packages? Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, underneath the tickets.
All right, let's do it. That sounds good to me. Okay, so there it is. Our ticket packages. There's the URL. Yes. So let's go ahead and put it there. So you could do this. There's basically a couple of things that are built into HTML that are meant for the user. Actually, there's plenty of things, including forms and so on. But two of them that are intended for the user to click on and have something happen. One of which we already are familiar with, right? They are the hrefs here, the anchors. The anchors are intended to be clicked on, and when they're tapped on, something happens. The user gets taken to someplace else. There's also a button in HTML, and it just looks like this. Like so, and then I can put content in there, and I can give an ID to the button, and so on. So what's the difference? Especially considering in CSS, you can make the button look like a link, or you can make the link look like a button. What's the difference? Generally speaking, for front-end web programmers, it's like this. An anchor should be something that takes the user someplace else, whereas a button is something that the user causes something to happen on that page, but you're not actually going anywhere. And by taking you somewhere else, I'm also talking about like taking you to a different place on the same page. That also counts as going somewhere. That's a different address. But this is not intended to change the address, right? It's just going to make it so that it prints the page. So for that reason, I'm going to use an actual button. When you do forms, you'll also realize there's a couple of different ways to do a button inside of there, and one of them is an input element. So same kind of thing. If you want the button to do something instead of taking you somewhere, then make it a button instead of a link or something like that. So I'm going to, let's go ahead and say print this page or something like that. Okay, so let's test it. Let's go save and go over here, and I can't see a thing, so do this. There it is, print this page. And you guys know me, I'm going to have to do some CSS on it right away because this looks rather horrible. I mean, the main thing is I just want to give it some padding. So let's go ahead and do that, maybe a little bit of extra margin top. So before we do the JavaScript, let's pop back over to our CSS. I really don't like it in tutorials where they're ostensibly doing a tutorial about JavaScript and they divert and do this big long thing with the CSS. But even so, I do have to do a couple of things or else it's going to bug me. So this is the button that's inside a section, so we can target it that way, or we could put an ID on here if you wanted to, either way. Let's see, I think I'm going to do it, where am I going to put this? I guess before we get to the figures, right? Because the figures happen underneath there in the content flow, so it might make sense to put this here in the CSS. So I'm about at line 210 or so in mine. But wherever you put it is fine. And I'm selecting for the button that's inside section. I'm making a deal out of that because at some point we may have a button inside the header as well. So at that point we would select for the header button instead. You know what, for now, let's just go ahead and make button because I have a feeling that no matter which one we do, we're going to want them to look the same. We're going to want to have a little padding with maybe a little margin top. So let's go ahead and just select for button here in the CSS. And padding, we probably won't need much. Let's just try 0.2 em, something like that. And then let me check it out in the browser and see how it looks. Yeah, I think that's probably about enough. Let's try 0.3 em. There might need a little bit more left and right, than top and bottom. It's feeling a little bit crunched on left and right. Top and bottom is fine now, so maybe I'll do a left and right of a slightly different value, like 0.5 em. Remember, if you do two different values, this is going to be top and bottom, and the second one's going to be left and right, like 0 auto. Yeah, that's looking a little better. So 0.2 top and bottom, or 0.3 top and bottom, 0.5 left and right. So I'll wind up with this guy right here. And then maybe a little bit extra margin on top. Margin top, I don't know, let's try 1M. Yeah, that's fine for now. It's probably a little too much, but do your own values. Make it look good to you. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. Yeah, that's a bit better. So this is what I wound up with. There's plenty more that could be done to turn this into like an actually good looking button, but for now, that's fine. I just want it to not be ugly.
Could you change color on it?
Sure. There we go. Notice, by the way, when we change the color on it, it does not change the border color. That's because this border is not actually a CSS property border. It's something that's being attached using the shadow DOM in the browser itself. On the other hand, I think you could do a border radius on this without doing anything else. So border radius 0.2M. And make it a little bit round. Yeah, see, this is something that I bumped into before, and this is why I tend to not touch these things unless I'm serious. I'd forgotten about this, but the browser is already styling it. It's one of those things that the browser is styling on its own, and you can mess with it a little bit, like adding padding and margin, but if you start messing with it too much, then it kind of throws up its hands and says, okay, fine, I'm giving up all control. I'm going to strip off my formatting and let you do whatever you want to. So you see, you wind up with kind of like this ugly border and everything. I'm just going to get rid of that and go back to just this for now. That's easier. Okay, so this stuff is not important. This is, make sure you've got a button that says print this page or something like that on the HTML page inside that first section. And let's go ahead and get our JavaScript settled here. So we'll have to create the JavaScript and then we'll have to call it into the page. So we don't want this happening. We don't want the page to print until the user has clicked on that button or tapped on that button. Otherwise, we could just do it in here. So if I just did like, oh, window.print here, like so, and I save and I go back to the browser and see, like as soon as it refreshed here, it goes to print. So that even confused me, and I'm the one who just did it. So anyone who arrives at one of your pages and then immediately goes into this, they're going to think this is the actual page and get real confused by it. You don't want that to happen, right? You don't want it to happen until they tap on this button right here. There's a couple of different ways to do that. But before we do it, I just want to point out what's happening here. When the JavaScript gets called in, remember it's an interpreted language. This gets interpreted immediately. And so the browser immediately sees, oh, there's a window.print method. I better go ahead and print this page. And bam, it gives you the print dialog box before you even get a chance to look at the page, right? Anything that you put in here like this, if it's a method or a function, it's going to run if there's not something else stopping it. Generally speaking, if you want this functionality to be available, but you don't want it to do it automatically on its own, what you do is you put it into a function. And then you call the function. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to put window.print inside of a function. And then we're going to attach that function as an event to the button that we created. So instead of just doing window.print, here's what you want to do. Declare a function, and there's multiple ways of doing this, but the simplest and oldest way is just to use a function keyword. This is declaring a function. Give a name to your function, something like print page. Notice that I'm doing the intercap or camel case. And you put the parentheses in there. I don't really know why those are considered necessary. I've seen other scripting languages where you don't have to put those in. And it seems a little bit counterintuitive to me because to me, if you put the parentheses right after the name, that means it's calling it. but it doesn't actually do that. So you do function print page with the parentheses, and then a curly brace code block like this. And then we put the functionality into the function. And this is where we put the thing that we want to happen, which is window.print. And we still need the parentheses in there. By the way, these semicolons are supposed to end statements. A function declaration is not actually a statement, so it does not get the semicolon at the end there. Window.print is a statement, and it gets the semicolon at the end. That's why you're not seeing the semicolon there, but you are there. So let's just go ahead and try this. I'm just going to save this. I haven't done anything else yet, right? I've just created the window.print, put it inside this function, and I go over here and I refresh, and this time it doesn't try to immediately print the page. It's hanging on to that. It's now aware of that functionality that I may want to do something with that, but it's not actually doing it anymore because it's been, what's the word for it? My brain's not working tonight. Well, if I think of it, I'll let you know. But it's a very specific technique about putting something into a function to keep it from being immediately available outside the function. Not enclosure, but yeah. Yeah, I guess it is an enclosure. Okay. So anyway, putting it in there, it's not immediately available until we call this function. So how do you call the function? Well, one way to do it would be either in the script page or here in the browser console to go ahead and call the function just like we did before with the window.print. So pop open the console here, and this time instead of saying window.print, I'm just going to call my function name, which was print page. Now again, if I do that without the parentheses, it tells me, okay, this is a function, here's what it looks like. And now if I do print page with the parentheses, now it does it. So because now I'm calling the function and it's going to do what's inside the function. Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and call it in our HTML. It's going to be the button here. So one way to add what's called an event listener or an event handler to a button or some other element is to put it into your JavaScript. And that's usually actually the way that I do it. There's something called a method called add an event listener. And you do that here in the JavaScript, but there's a way to get it right into your HTML. And I think this is the way most people learn at first how to do this, and it's probably the simplest way. Not necessarily the most robust way. So you can put this directly into your HTML as an attribute. And in this case, I want to make it so that when the button is clicked on, that it fires this functionality. And so this attribute is going to be called onClick. Now because we're in HTML land and not in JavaScript land, notice it's all lowercase. It doesn't actually matter. You can do this all in uppercase if you want to. But if we were in JavaScript land, it would be this probably instead. Although, actually, is it? I don't know. I'll have to check my notes and see if it is. But in any case, in HTML, you do onClick equals, and then the quotes. And then you tell it what to do within the quotes here. Now, I could just put window.print directly inside of here, but we're going to call the function that we created. And so this is going to be print page with the parentheses. Now, in this case, like I accidentally hit the caps lock key and I got like a capital G and E like this. Yeah, that would make a difference because JavaScript is case sensitive, unlike HTML and CSS. So that you would have to watch out for. It would have to be exactly the same as the function name that you gave it in the declaration. All right, so check it out. Button onClick equals print page, save. Go ahead and test it out in the browser. If everything worked out right, you'll have to refresh, right? But if everything worked out right, I'm going to close this guy. Then you should be able to scroll down and tap on this button now. And when you do, it offers to print the page for you. So this is the first thing that we've done to actually add some functionality to the page itself, which of course is what we're trying to do.
Can we do that hover click thing so that like it changes the mouse when it's hovering over it.
It's not doing that, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, we should be able to. Let's do, this is going to be in the CSS. So cursor pointer, like so. And then refresh over here.
Am I missing something? Mine isn't doing the print thing.
Let's go ahead and it's almost time for us to pause here. So I'm going to pause the recording and let's take a look at, there we go. Share screen. Okay. So let's see, what am I doing here? I'm going to my code, which is all the way down here.
Are we slapping this alternate image into the images folder?
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me. You can use a different image if you want to. But yeah, I did go to the classroom stream and I put in, why are you still doing that? Okay, there we go. Yeah, I went to the classroom stream and I threw in a Chucky image that we can use. And you can totally use a different image if you want to. I just thought that one was kind of funny, and I made it the same size as the other images in the figures. So when we add some JavaScript to switch that out, we'll switch it out with Chucky. It's just a little Easter egg for a little humor for our users. Most users will never get around to clicking on those images, but once in a while someone might, and it might be kind of fun. So first things first, let's get that footer taken care of. So I want to, let's see, where am I testing? Look at Chrome, right? Where'd Chrome go? There it is. So inside the footer here, it says copyright 2018 and then the rest of it. So what happens if we wanted to say copyright 2018 to 2023, and then when the calendar ticks over to 2024, then we want it to do that instead. So we can make that happen. There are certain objects in JavaScript that you instantiate by using the new keyword, and date is one of those. So you can like create a new date and then apply a method on it, like get full year, which is how you get like the 4-character year. You guys need to understand when I'm throwing all this stuff at you, I'm not expecting you to remember all this stuff. Like I'm not going to put it on the text. Like how do you get the full year using JavaScript and put it into the copyright? It's not going to be like that. I think my job right here for this portion of the class is just to show you a bunch of stuff. And then, you know, you'll get to do something more concrete with it when you get into front-end, you know, web development. Which is not to say there won't be any JavaScript on the final, but I'll make it something simple. I'm not going to make it so that you have to remember like all these methods and objects and so on. So it'll be some simple DOM operations, like how do you do query selector to select for the first element and then log it to the console or something like that. So what are we doing? Footer. Let's do it. So I'm going to go to my JavaScript page here. And remember I was saying before, it's a good idea to kind of modularize things and get things into separate JavaScript files. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to make this all into one thing here. And if you want to, it's not a bad idea to put some comments. And JavaScript, you do have single line comments, unlike you know, CSS, HTML, those guys. So this is the print page button that we did here. And this is nothing at all. And what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be doing current year copyright. And so first things first, let's go ahead and create a variable. And the initial value of that variable is going to be getting the full year from the new date. So I'll show you what that looks like. We're going to declare the variable same way we did up here by using the let keyword. So I'm going to do something like let current year equal, and here's what I was talking about, like new date, parentheses. It's like running a kind of a constructor function thing. I don't know. Anyway, use the parentheses as if you were calling a function, which in a way you are. But in JavaScript, you can daisy chain functions. So if there's a method attached to this, I can put a dot syntax and just go ahead and put another function after the dot. So it's going to be get full year. Yes. Like that. So it's new date dot get full year, and this is being stored in the current year variable. So if I save this and go over to the browser and refresh and then open up the console, and then I don't think I want to look at this anymore. There we go. I'll just do it like that. That way I can actually see stuff on the page. Let's see, what was it? Current year, is that what we called it? Yes, current year. And there it is, 2023. That is in fact the current year, so that's what it'll give us. So on January 1st of next year, when it ticks over, it'll show 2024 instead. So that's what we want. we want to be putting something into the footer here. And so we want to select for that. We already know how to do that, right? Let figure equal document.query selector figure. If you want to, go ahead and just copy this line and paste it down here, and then just change a couple of things. Or go ahead and type it in again if you want to start getting into your fingers, which is not a bad idea. This time we're going to say let footer equal document.query selector footer instead of figure. And then if we want to put this into the content of the footer, so the get full year, the current year into the footer. Now I'm going to do a hatchet job at first, which is going to be it's going to replace all this code here, and then we'll figure out a way to get it to do both. But for now, let's just go ahead and do the hatchet job. We're just going to go ahead and say footer dot. Let's start with text content, which is one of the properties of HTML elements, equals current year, like that. So we're passing in the variable value into the text content property of the footer. We save that and go over to the browser and refresh. And there it is. It says 2023 in there instead of all the other stuff that we had. So there's the code for that.
Can you take a 2-minute pause right
I think
here?
mine broke.
Yeah, I'll pause here.
I think mine broke. I think maybe I missed a step. Because
Okay.
now all my footer says is 2023.
Oh yeah, mine too.
Oh,
Remember, I was
okay.
talking about the hatch. That's what I meant by the hatchet job.
Okay.
So we're taking basically the text content of the footer was and copy and all that other stuff about the institution and so on, and we've replaced all that text content with just the current year. Let me know when you guys are done looking at this.
Let current year equal new date new, it's not new, not date. Okay, new date, open dot, get full year, open close, boom, let footer.
Wait, what did you mean by the open and close?
Oh, parentheses.
You get both. You get both parentheses before, like after date and after get full year, though.
Yeah.
See that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just mumbling to myself, sorry. Let footer equal document dot query selector, open quote. Does it have to be a single quote, or
No.
can it be a double quote?
It can be a double quote.
Okay, I'll just go back to single like I used on the other one. All right, footer, okay.
As long as they match. That's all that matters.
Footer dot text content equals current year. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm weird because I wanted to do shit my own way.
No problem. Understandable. Is it working in the browser?
It's not even showing up in the preview.
Yeah, try it in a browser. I'm not sure that the
Oh, that's
preview
right.
is going to even.
It's not doing. It doesn't do JavaScript so swell in the preview.
I noticed that.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. No, it didn't work.
Okay, let me go ahead and pause the recording here. There we go. So I just want to get the rest of the stuff in there too. So I just need to concatenate it. Concatenate a string with the variable value of 2023 or 2024 next year. And so let's go ahead and do that. So I think for now I'm going to skip past the template literal stuff. If we have time at the end and people's brains aren't fried, we can come back and do that again. But for now, I'm just going to do the classic thing here. Of doing concatenation, and concatenation in JavaScript is done with a plus operator. If you're in PHP, it's a dot. I'm not sure what it is in C++. You guys could tell me. But basically, I'm going to take this stuff here and I'm going to copy it. So this is in my source code, right? This is in the HTML page. I'm copying all the stuff that's inside the paragraph, inside the footer, but not the paragraph tags themselves. Just and copy, and then everything up to and including the zip code there. And get that copied. And what we're going to do is we're going to use some plus concatenators here in order to make this work. I'm going to comment out this one, although really it doesn't need to be because, well, yeah, let's just go ahead and leave it. But I'm going to do another one right underneath it here. Footer.text content equals and then I'm going to, instead of putting something in here, I'm going to do a return and put this on a new line. And I'm going to use single quotes. You can use doubles if you want to, and put this in here. But remember, the current year is something that we want to show up right after 2018. Like I want 2018 and then a dash, and then I want it to say 2023 here, right? Except instead of typing in 2023, I'm going to use the current year variable. So the way this works is that each one of these, like a string in JavaScript, using this older, like the single quotes or double quotes, like you cannot break this up onto multiple lines. You see how it's freaking out now? It doesn't know that this is part of the same string, even though all I did was add some white space here. And it's one of the stickier parts of white space in JavaScript, which is usually pretty loose about how white space is treated. But you can't do that. You cannot break up a traditional string in JavaScript across two lines, whether using single quotes or double quotes. You can do it with the backslashes, but we're not doing that just yet. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have one string that says and copy 2018 dash. I added a dash in there, and then close the string. And then I've got another string here, and I need to put quotes around that too. And then in between those two, I'm going to have our current year variable. So the current year should spit out whatever is the value that's getting returned from the getFullYear method on new date. So this one here is a string. Make sure this is surrounded by strings, or quotes rather. This one down here from the comma onward before San Joaquin Valley Town Hall is also a string. It's also surrounded by quotes. Get current year is not surrounded by quotes because it's an identifier. It's not a string. It's a variable name. Now this by itself is not going to work. We need the plus operators in between those three guys. So and copy 2018 dash plus get current year plus, and then the last string here. And I'll put the semicolon at the end of it, and that should be what we need.
You need a space after that 2023 right there.
I don't think so, because I've got a comma right here afterwards.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I just did directly. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I see what.
Yeah, if we didn't have the comma, then we would definitely want a space there.
My copyright's not coming out though.
You're right. It won't. Let's try it. I'm going to save this and go over to the browser and refresh it. And instead of getting the copyright symbol, it's actually putting in and copy here. So I did this on purpose to illustrate how certain properties and methods in JavaScript can seem very similar to each other, but actually are not the same thing. Text content here, if I change that instead to a different property called inner HTML, which allows this to be interpreted as HTML entity instead of just the text that it is, and save that and go back over here, and now it's working properly. Now I get the copyright symbol 2018 to 2023, etc., etc. There's my code. But make sure you change it to inner HTML. And now I'm going to get rid of this duplicate up here. This, by the way I'm teaching you guys, I just want to make sure everyone understands that this is not what most people would consider the recommended way to teach JavaScript. I think this is the best way to learn because you get to see stuff in the browser right away. But just about anybody else you would ask would say, no, you got to teach them arrays and objects, like how to build a function properly and how to do all that stuff first before doing any of this DOM operation stuff. So if you would say, oh, you know what, this is okay, but I want to take myself through, I don't know, like a LinkedIn Learning or Skillshare or something like that, a JavaScript course, they're not going to start it like this. Almost certainly. They're going to start it with, learning about the collections and, how to build and nest functions and so on. So just remember that about strings. Traditional strings you cannot knock onto two lines. And the plus operator is what you use to concatenate, which means that I've got a couple of strings, but I need to have a variable value here in the middle of them. And so I do the plus operator in order to make that happen. Anybody running into trouble making this work in the browser? Okay, well, we've done two of the things that the chapter 19 wanted us to do. Let's go ahead and, actually this is also one. They use the jQuery to swap images and we're going to use JavaScript instead. So in, where are we? Here we go. In the classroom stream, this is chucky.jpg and I'm going to download this guy. I like that picture. I think that's a good portrait of Chucky. No, I do not want to print it. I want to download it. Isn't that what I guess I didn't. Let me go to your download. There we go.
Yeah, I slapped it into the images subfolder.
Good. That's exactly where it goes. Okay, here we go. Chapter 11. This is chapter 19. Let's go into images here. And I will put Chucky in there just for fun in an anti-work kind of way, right? And let's go ahead and do an image swap. Now I want to do an image swap so that any of these three images that is clicked on will change out for the Chucky image, not just one. We already know how to do that pretty much, right? We can do it like just a query selector. But in this case, I'm going to have to do a query selector all to select all of these images, and then I'm going to have to loop through them. So again, those of you who do C++ or any kind of procedural language, you know about looping. You have the classic for loop, while loop, and for while loop, or do while rather. And as far as I know in C, those are pretty much the only real loops that they've got. JavaScript has been, and those are the ones that you started out with in JavaScript. When I first started learning JavaScript, like that was it. Those were the loops just like in C. But JavaScript has been adding other kinds of loops in the meantime. First they added a for in loop, and now they've got a for of loop, which is one of my favorites. They added a for each loop to match like PHP. And there are other kinds of iterations that you can do across different kinds of collections as well. It's really turning into kind of a robust language these days, although just as quirky as it ever was. So I'll be showing you one of my favorite loops in JavaScript here. So this is going to be, we're doing the image swap is the next bit that we're doing here. I'll go ahead and put in JS, not jQuery. jQuery, I always do that. Okay, and I don't know why I did that as a multi-line comment. I guess because I've been working in CSS for a few weeks now, so there we go. Make that better. Okay, so let's start off by getting the document query selector, except this time we're going to do document.querySelector all. So let's say let images, maybe. Come up with whatever variable name makes sense to you. Equal document.querySelector all this time, since we want to grab all the images. But you're not working there. And I don't want all images, I just want the images that are inside the figures. So figure image. Remember, you can use any kind of CSS selector in here. That's the wonder about the query selector and query selector all, is if you know CSS, you're halfway there. Okay, so if I save that and go check on it in the browser, as I like to do nearly constantly, I just want to type in images and make sure it returns something, and there's my node list of those 3 images there. So let's go ahead and loop over them. So we did a click element, right, or event on the button here. Where is it? Yeah, onClick equals print page. So we're going to do onClick in the JavaScript instead of in the HTML here, and it'll work the same way. And I was wrong. I was saying, yeah, in the JavaScript it would be a capital C, but it's not. It's the same thing in JavaScript. That's probably a good thing. So what we'll do is we will loop through the images and add an onClick to all of them that way. So here is one of my favorite loops in JavaScript, which is the for of loop, yay. And here's what it looks like. It looks like you're going to start with a regular for loop, but then right away you can create a variable. Let's say let I of images, which is that node list that we selected for here. And then you can select for each of those elements in turn. So I don't have to do something like let I equal 0, I is less than images.length I plus. Okay, which, yeah, I could. That loop does exist in JavaScript. It always has. But this is a newer one. And I just like the syntax ever so much better. So let I of images, and let's just test the loop real quick. I'm just going to say console.log I. So this is how you spit something out to the console if you don't want to actually work in the console, but you just want to test if something's working, so you spit it out to the console. A lot of people, when they're learning JavaScript, will do alerts, but I think that's a really bad idea most of the time. I think you want to just put it into the console, because then if you forget to take this out, else like we're in the life cycle of your application, then the users will never know that it's there. So I'm just going to test it this way, console.log I. I'm going to save this, and there it is. There are my 3 images. When I refresh the page, it brought those in one at a time, so it's looping through those. So I will maybe comment this out just so it's not getting in the way. And let's go ahead and do the onClick event. So remember, I mentioned that there's the add event listener, which we could use that, but it's a little more complex. Let's stick with the onClick. So I.onClick. And by the way, You might think, oh, click, this is really old-fashioned because they're talking about mouse clicks. Well, what about screen taps? As far as I know, on-click will work for screen taps as well. Mobile browsers know to look for that as a basic event for taps. So i.onClick equals function. Remember, if there's something that you don't want to happen right away, put it into a function. This is called an anonymous function. It doesn't have a name. Whereas this one here is not anonymous. It does have a name. And we're almost there already. The only thing we have to do is change the source attribute of each of these images when it gets clicked on to the Chucky image. And it turns out that there is a property which is the same as the source attribute. There it is, of the image. And I can just say i.source, src, I being each of the images as it's being looped through, equals, and then what is it, images slash, what do they call it, just chucky.jpg? Yes, chucky.jpg. This is, because it's got the equals in there, this is actually a statement, and so it gets the semicolon at the end. And this should do it. Go ahead and save and try it out in the browser and see how it works. Yeah, it sounds like somebody's work.
Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot I had another one on there. I had a link that unclick and sends you to let me Google that for you .app, and then it says type Amy Choi here.
Oh boy.
So when you click on it, it goes to let me Google that for you.
I love that website. I had forgotten about that, but yeah, that's a great one. Okay, I'm going to test mine out. I'm going to go to the browser, and now when I tap on one of these, it's replaced by Chucky, and there's another one, and there's another one. Ah!
That's pretty cool.
Can you put a timer on that or something like that? It says to only display it for like 2 seconds, like just flash it really quick.
Yeah, you can. I don't want to do it in demo right now, but there is a built-in method in JavaScript called set timeout, and you can do it, run it by milliseconds. So if you wanted something to wait 2 seconds before running, then you do a set timeout for 2000.
It's gonna be like Fight Club here, splicing in pictures.
Yeah, you can really mess with your users if you're evil.
You click on that, and all of a sudden you get a giant Chucky, but only for like 1/3 of a second, maybe less.
Yeah, there was an actually scary one that someone was running around a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, where he just showed, say, hey, look really carefully at this image, and you'd lean way in and look, and that's when it would turn into this animated witch who would like look like she was coming out of the screen.
Yeah.
It freaked me out.
I bet you had fun with the Jostens Frog Blender too, huh?
Just like this stuff all disappeared on refresh, when we refresh, it once again is loading from the actual page source, which has the original sources for those images, and so they disappear. But then if we click again, there it is again. So cool. So you see, users, tell me this isn't a lovely little loop. Isn't that nice? That's just pretty. Now, one of the limitations of it is it's not so easy to grab the keys of items. Just grab the items themselves. If that's all you need to do, then the for of loop that's your workhorse. It's lovely. Some of these new loops, remember this is runtime environment, so performance does matter how quick something runs. So when for of was first introduced, it was very slow, and that was the reason why we didn't use it for a while. But at this point, I think that it's just about as fast, or at least close to as fast as a regular for loop. I think the regular for loop with the iterator and everything, I think that's still the fastest loop. I think it always will be, probably. But these other ones, they've gotten fast enough that it's probably fine. If you were doing an enterprise level thing with, tens of thousands of visitors an hour, then yeah, absolutely use the traditional loop instead, because that'll save you some time. but I think this one's pretty. Okay, so we learned a few things. We did the print page button. We changed the footer with some dynamic content. We get full year of a new date. And then we looped through some images for some more dynamic content. When the user clicks, then the image changes out to our Chucky image. So this will bring us around full loop. And we finally, no pun, we finally get around to doing what all this stuff was for, which is to do our mobile nav. So right now our mobile nav is such that we've got the button. Oh, did I do position fixed on that? Is this what was happening with you? Okay, let me refresh this. I must have done position fixed on this without realizing it. Let me check my CSS real quick here. Let's see, what is that? Let's see, I must have put it down here with navigation. Header I, position fixed. Okay, so this was totally a mistake that I made last time. Position fixed is exactly what I was talking about, and what you see here, that when you scroll, the button follows you down the page. So you could do like a sticky nav or a sticky advertisement or something like that if you wanted to. What I meant to do is position absolute, and I apologize for that. But if we do position absolute instead and then go over here, now it's the same thing. It's got the same position from the upper right corner, but it scrolls with the content now instead of remaining sticky on the page. So I did not mean to do that last time. That was a little bit of an error. So this is what I changed it to. If you leave it at position fixed, that's fine. Just know what the difference is. So what I want to do now with JavaScript is make it so when the user taps on this, the navigation pops down, and they tap on it again, and the navigation goes away. Easy peasy, right? So in order to do that, we will have to select for the nav element. We may not even need to select for the button here, which is actually this I element here. Let's see. This is, let's check this out here. This is an I element here. We could do it one of two ways. We could select for the I and then do the on-click in our JavaScript here like we did here, or we could just attach an on-click right here on the I itself. So maybe in the interest of keeping things simple, we'll just go ahead and put it right on here. But let's write our function first. So this is the thing. So this is going to be our, let me do a single line again. This is going to be our mobile nav dropdown is what we're doing here. Yeah, we've done quite a bit today. Look at all this. You guys are awesome. Okay, so this is again the function. I'll call this function. I'll just call this dropdown. So this is just like before. The dropdown is something that we don't want to happen right away, just like we didn't want the window.print to happen right away. So we put it inside of a function and then call the function when that one element is tapped on with an on-click. Okay, so function dropdown. And it's also making use of something else that we did. I guess we didn't do it here, but we did it in the console in the browser when we were playing around with the background color of that first figure, just in the sandbox there. And it was using the style property. And then the style property has all those different CSS properties attached to it. So in order to show or hide an element, we can check what we've already done in the CSS, which is that the nav here, we did a display none on, right? And so we'll be able to access this as well. It's going to be style.display equals, in quotes, none. And then we'll have to change it to display flex in order to make things work. So here's what it looks like here. So inside the function, we're going to do one other code structure here, which is a conditional. It's going to be an if-else statement. And basically what it's going to say is if the nav.style.display equals flex, then set it to none, which will make it disappear. And if the style of the display is none, then set it to flex. And so whichever one happens when it gets clicked on, it'll happen one of those two. If it's already like hidden, then it'll show. And if it's already showing, then it will hide when it gets clicked on. So here's what the conditional looks like. If, and then in parentheses, nav, oh wait, we need to select for nav first, don't we? I was about to use the nav selector, but we actually need to do that first with a document query selector. So let's do that first. So let's let nav equals, and if you want to, go ahead and just copy this first one down and then just change to nav and nav from figure and figure. Let nav equal document dot query selector nav. There we go. And now I can use this nav, which I was going to use without, and it would have given me a reference error, right? Because it wouldn't have known. But now we've got a variable called nav. So if nav dot style dot display equals flex, and I don't know about you guys, but I like to build the logical structure before putting in the details. So first I will do the if code block and then the then code block, and I'll skip over this stuff and come back to it. I don't know, that's just me. And I don't always do it that way, but often I do. So if the style of nav, if the display style of nav is flex, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, do a then, else, not then. Do something else. Now you might have noticed, and again, if you've done C, then you're familiar with this. If you do a double or triple equals, this is not an assignment. This is a comparison operator, which means that we're checking to see if the display style of nav is equal to flex. If you were to do this is an important note. If you were to do a single quote like this, then it would basically negate the entire if portion of that statement. It would treat this as its own statement, and it would set the display to flex, no matter what. But if you do this, then it's testing to see if it's equal to flex. It's an important note to remember. Keep that in mind. If you haven't done the C class yet and you're going to take it later, then keep that in mind. That's an important one. Okay, so if nav style display equals flex, then we're going to set it to none. nav.style.display, and this one is an assignment. We're telling it to change it to none, so it just gets the one equal. Else nav.style.display equals flex. So if it's already hidden, if it's already got a display none on it, which it should currently, then it'll change it to flex. And if it's got flex, then it'll change it to none. And each of those will happen when that button is clicked on. So we've got our function here. I'll leave this up for a moment so you guys can take a look at it and keep typing if you need to. We still need to call the function. Remember when we did like the print page function, nothing happened until we actually did an on-click in the HTML, or in the case of the image swap, did an on-click here inside of our loop. So we're going to have to do the same thing here. We've got our function, but we haven't called it yet. And that's going to be the last thing that we do, I think. So are you guys ready? Have you seen this for enough? Are we ready to go ahead and call the function?
Yep, already here.
Not yet.
All right. Take your time. We're doing good.
All right, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Everybody else? Let's get this thing called. So I'm just going to pop over here to my eye. And I usually like putting the names at the end of the attribute list. You could totally do it however you want to. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. But if you're wondering, that's why I'm putting this in the middle instead of putting it at the end. I think it's easier to see the names when they're out at the end there. So in here, I will put the onClick equals, and then what was our function name? Drop down like so. And unless I've screwed something up, I think that ought to do it. Let's try it. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to the browser. And then I'm going to try clicking on this thing. When I do, it should drop down the menu. When I click on it again, pulls it back up again. And naturally...
I need to see the on-click.
Yeah, I'll show it again in just a moment. But here's the functionality we're looking for. And naturally, when I click on one of these, of course, it will collapse again because you're refreshing the page or loading a new page at that point.
What's it look like if you make it wider so that wasn't on the top?
Then the button simply won't exist, or it'll exist,
Okay,
but it won't be showing. Yeah. Okay, did anybody run into trouble making theirs work? All right, cool. So yeah, if we bring this out wider, like for instance, get rid of this guy here, then that's just simply disappeared, which we did in our CSS before that. So this is kind of running independently, and it'll only run on narrow sizes here. We'll get this guy going. Now there are other things that you can do. Notice that when we drop this down, it pushes the content down as well. Some people wouldn't like that. Some people would think that this should go over the top of the content, in which case there are things you can do with absolute positioning and so on in order to make that happen. But for this, I think that we're good. I think I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the way this turned. It's looking good. Okay, so any questions about, we did a bunch of, look at all this stuff we did. You guys, this is rock and roll. This is faster than I've ever taken any class in leading through this stuff. Any questions about anything we did or anything else to do with JavaScript, just as an introductory thing?
No questions so far.
Okay, cool. Then that's it, what I've got for the demo. Let me, don't run away just yet. I need to make a submission folder for you guys to turn this in. So let me get the recording stopped.